Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Can I first of all assure you that we'll not be going through every page of this 400-page report. And what we've done is been quite selective and taken bits out, which would be interesting. But firstly, I'd like to thank ELM for this opportunity. And also to Salman Farsi, there he is, and his team for organizing the event. In fact, the MCB owes a double thanks to Salman Farsi, because he's the one who has, and his team have actually done the painstaking work of designing the report, laying out the tables. So, you know, we haven't had the opportunity to thank you formally, but Jazakallah khair for that. In the cover of the report, of the first volume, you have the Salam Center. And the Salam Center is there because it represents perhaps the first generation of a new type of community center, both in its futuristic design and its aspirations, what it wants to do within the community. So, so what we have done is split our presentation into 5 topics. Into 5 topics, and I shall be dealing with some and Fatema with others. And in each topic, each should be about 10 minutes, and each of them ends with a provocative question. So in each topic, we are beginning with some census data, then highlighting some aspect of interest, which we found important, and then connecting that to some of the challenges which that raises for the Muslim community. So for example, in the first session, which I'll be starting off now, what is the census? Basically is to provide you just a quick introduction, what it's about, then to look at the census data on the population of each faith community in Britain, and then thirdly, raising the question, what is the role of Muslims as ambassadors for faith in an increasingly secular society? And the data, I'll explain why I'm saying that. Then the next session, Mapping Muslims, Fatema is an expert in this area in terms of how do we portray census data in maps, which is a very rich way of conveying information. And in fact, Fatema is going to be focusing on Tower Hamlets and the neighboring boroughs. And I'm sure a lot of you are residents of Tower Hamlets or Newham, or these barking diagrams. So we'll find that particularly interesting. In the third session, what I want to put across is the idea that Muslims really are a strategic asset to Britain, and explaining why that is the case. And also, there's information in the census which allows us to challenge the right-wing, extreme right-wing tropes. You know, the right-wing trope that Muslims don't speak English, right? Or we rather enjoy living in ghettos. So there's data in the census which allows us to really challenge that narrative. And so on. So I won't go through each, but it'll gradually unfold itself. So beginning with what is the census? Very quickly, probably many of you are familiar, every 10 years, the government sends out a detailed questionnaire to every household, about 50 questions. And of those 50 questions, 2 are of particular interest to us are the question on religion and the question on ethnicity. And on the left, you have the question on religion. And you'll see that there are tick boxes for the major faiths. And interestingly, also a tick box for no religion, which may sound paradoxical to have that in a religion question. And also, again, very interestingly, we have a write-in option for any other religion. Okay? And on the right-hand side, you have the ethnicity question, which is more detailed. And since 2011, we had a question on the Arab population ethnicity, so we have some more analytical abilities. But you know, census is something quite political. And if you were in France, there would not be a question on ethnicity or religion in the census, because in France, we are all citizens, okay? So religion and ethnicity is statistically invisible. which is quite ridiculous given the level of discrimination going on in France. So what we have then, as a result of the religion and ethnicity questions in the British census, a remarkable ability to look at the characteristics of small populations or the minority faiths. So for example, for Muslims, we can ask the question, where do Muslims live in the deprived neighborhoods, right? Or what is the proportion of Muslim women who are in employment or who are looking after home and family? Those are sorts of rich questions we can ask and use that for policy development. So looking at some census data, what we have come across from the 2021 census is that there are 4 million Muslims in the United Kingdom across all the 4 countries, mainly in England, 3.8 million, but not an insignificant number in Wales, 67,000, a big number in Scotland, about 120,000, and a growing community in Northern Ireland, but only 10,000. Okay, so it's really quite ironical that there should have been these the Islamophobic riots recently in Northern Ireland with such a small Muslim population. So it's not to do with Muslim population, there are other factors at work. So we are 6% of the overall population, and out of 67 million. But the pie chart at the bottom is important because it just shows the distribution of the minority faiths, right? So you can see that the Muslims population is more than all the other minority faiths put together, okay? Now this also has a political implication, because if you are in situations like there are consultation meetings or Sacre or others, and the organizers say, oh, one Hindu, one Sikh, one from the Jewish community, and one from the Muslim community, that does not represent the weightage of the local area. So you should need to take that into account. Okay, again, that's another way why census data is important. And okay, so now the point we are trying to make in the report is that just like Britain is diverse, so is the Muslim community diverse. You know, we are not a homogeneous group. We have different cultures, different languages, you know, different approaches to issues of the Sharia, all these things. We are a multicultural group within ourselves. And while in the past the Muslim population has been predominantly Asian, in the last 20 years, if you can imagine a cake, the slice of the Asian cake is reducing, and the slice of the African and Arab slices are increasing. So there's a change in the ethnic makeup of the community. In the bottom, I don't know whether you can see the bottom slide. So that is telling us, for example, that in the white ethnic group, 0.5% of the white ethnic group is Muslim, okay? And what that means is 0.5% is about 230,000, okay? Of that 230,000, about 90,000 are white British. Okay, so the balance are other people who like to self-declare themselves as white. So it could be the Turkish Cypriots, it could be the Persians, it could be other groups. We do need to do more further work, but it's not a small number. Now what I found also, what we as a group found interesting, is that if you look at the black ethnicity, 67% of the black ethnicity say they are Christian. If you look at the white ethnicity, 50% say they're Christian. Okay, so this brings me, in my mind, one of Malcolm X's remarks, and whoever can come up with how that remark connects with this, there's a free set of reports, okay? So Christianity is in fact sustained by the black churches. And if you go to South London on a Sunday, it's the black churches which are packed. Okay, so now this is some tough news, okay? Our population has increased from 2.8 million to 4 million, okay? And overall in Britain, in that 10 years, the population has increased by 5 million. So Muslims are accounting for a third of the overall growth in the UK population. But we need to look at this in context, in terms of demographics. And there are two big reasons for this. Firstly, and Fatema is going to come to this later, if you look at the profile, we are much more in the population of young families with children, right? Which is one factor. And the other factor is, of course, that of migration. And there are two types of migration. I think the bigger amount of migration from Pakistan and Bangladesh is because of family reunion, right? And then the others, like from North Africa and so on, is because of this insecurity, food insecurity, climate insecurity. Those are the factors. Whether this will continue in the future or not, my colleagues here are much more expert in population forecasting. They can help you, or they can guide us further. What will be the next jump, okay? Now, so I'm just going to end this section with a remark a bit more reflective. And you may have noticed in the earlier slides that in England, that in Scotland and Wales, you may not have picked this up, the no-religion population is more than the Christian population. And very soon in England, it's very likely that the no-religion population is going to be more than the Christian population, okay? So now what does that mean for us? And if you look at the discussion going on, there are 2 points of view, all right? One point of view, which is put forward by Theos, which is a religiously based think tank, it is saying that when people say no religion, it doesn't mean they do not believe in God, or they're looking for something. The other point of view, which is at the bottom left, by Professor Linda Woodhead, is that just like it's a consumer culture, people like to shop around, they're shopping around for something as a fad, all right? And if you look at the fads, you see there's paganism, 69,000, right? There's spiritualists, there's all sorts, shamanism, and so on, right? So there's a whole variety of other ways people are looking for some spiritual connection. So I just want to end on this issue, which for us to reflect, is what does that mean for us, as ambassadors of a faith in a secularized, increasingly secularized context? And what are our responsibilities when we know that people are there looking for some sort of spiritual answer? So that's where that's the end of the first topic, and we can go on to the second topic now, to Fatema.
Okay, so this bit is going to be more about where Muslims are based throughout the UK, and more specifically in the East London boroughs of Tower Hamlets, Newham, Redbridge, and Barking and Dagenham, and also looking at kind of how these Muslims live, not only just where they live. Okay, so here we have a map of the UK, and this is the Muslim population in 2021. So where you get a darker red is where there are more Muslims. And so there's UK, and then there's London blown up there. Muslims are generally concentrated in the capital city, in the big cities. 99% of Muslims live in the urban areas. 1/3 of all the Muslims in the UK live in London. Okay. And then we have big populations in Birmingham, Bradford, Manchester. Yeah, this is a little animation of how you can see. So this is 2001, 2011, and 2021. And you can see that the areas are getting slightly more red and slightly darker. Slightly darker, and the darkness is spreading. So basically, Muslims are growing. The population is growing. Okay, and we have big growth of Muslims in London, Birmingham, in terms of absolute numbers. And then we also have large population increases in Manchester. This is like the change in Muslims from 2011 to 2021. So we've got 42,000 more Muslims, which is a 53% increase. So that's just an idea of how our society has changed. And then as the society becomes more Muslim, we need to think about what kind of infrastructure is there for these Muslims. We need enough places, facilities for people to pray at work as well as school, enough facilities to look after people's burials, It's all things that we need to start making sure there's enough provision of in the Muslim community. Looking more specifically at London, again, this is an animation, so this is 2001, 2011, and 2021, and you can see that London is becoming more and more Muslim as well. And this is how the populations of Tower Hamlets, Newham, Redbridge, and Barking and Dagenham have changed. Tower Hamlets is 40% Muslim. Barking and Dagenham is now 24% Muslim, but in 2001, Barking and Dagenham was only 4% Muslim, so it's had a big growth in Muslim population. Okay, so now we know where people are living. Let's look into kind of how they're living, what kind of conditions they're living in. So there's a government measure, and it's called the Index of Multiple Deprivation. And it takes every area in the UK, and it splits it into an area of around 1,500 residents. And then it ranks these areas based on these 7 indices, so the income, employment, education, health, housing, and it ranks them from 1 to about 35,000, because that's how many of these areas there are. And 1 is where you'll see the highest level of disadvantage, and 35,000 is the most affluent area, okay? So we're gonna look at Tower Hamlets first, okay? On this side, we've got the Muslim population, so where we get a darker orange, that's where there's more Muslims. And on this side, we've got the same map, but this is the Index of Multiple Deprivation. And where we've got a darker orange here is where you get greater levels of disadvantage. So the Muslims are spread kind of through the middle of Tower Hamlets, okay? They're Muslims everywhere, but more concentrated towards the middle. The borough is more deprived towards the north, and a few more affluent areas towards the south of the borough. If you look at an area like Whitechapel, just on that side, you get areas where you've got 10 to 20% Muslims that are actually relatively affluent. And then you've got areas where there's 60 to 70% Muslim, like over here. And these areas are a bit more disadvantaged. If we look at Newham, this is one of the boroughs that is one of the most deprived boroughs in terms of the Index of Multiple Deprivation in the UK. There's more Muslims towards the northeast of this borough, but 35% of this borough is Muslim, okay? The whole borough is quite a deep shade of orange, except for this tiny little pocket over here in Royal Victoria. This is a borough that is a borough which has lots of disadvantage. We look at Redbridge. The Muslims are concentrated towards the southeast of the borough, okay? And similarly, in the southeast of the borough, that's where we see a lot of deprivation. But there's also pockets where there's less Muslims, like up there in Hainault, which also have disadvantage. So it's not just affecting Muslims, but it does affect Muslims, okay? Just out of interest, does anyone live in any of these boroughs that we've mentioned? And if you see these areas, does that reflect the reality? Do you see there's more Muslims in these areas? There's more overcrowding in the houses in these areas? Yeah? And then the last borough we're going to look at is Barking and Dagenham. This is also one of the most deprived areas in boroughs in the UK. It was 24% Muslim in 2021, and in 20 years ago it was only 4% Muslim. And Longbridge is the area where there's the highest population of Muslims in this borough. If we look at all of these boroughs together, if we add up the Muslim population, it's 396,000 Muslims living across these 4 boroughs, which is actually 1 in 10 of Muslims in the UK live in these 4 boroughs in London. Okay, so whatever happens and whatever we do for Muslims in the area does impact a lot of the Muslims in the country. Also, if we look at the other disadvantaged boroughs, sorry, yes?
Just a quick question. You mentioned this already. So when you say these are 4 boroughs with the highest concentration of Muslims at the moment in London?
No, we're focusing on these boroughs because it's here.
Right.
But yes, probably these 4 boroughs are also, yes.
Yeah, And
Yeah.
into white as well.
Yeah.
Well done for this round of the one.
Yeah. Well, just because this is where the presentation is, we're focusing on these four at the moment. Okay. Also looking at other boroughs through the UK that have high Muslim population and deprivation, we find that there's 400,000 Muslim children growing up in the most deprived areas of the UK. Okay. And that if you have a Muslim newborn, they're 3 times as likely to be born in one of the most deprived areas compared to anyone else. And they have a quarter of the chance of being born in one of the most affluent areas. So kind of you're likely to be born into this deprivation. So we need to start addressing these issues. But, so as you see here, the Muslims live kind of through the middle. In comparison, we're going to look at the white population that we said only 0.5% of them are Muslim. So this is going to be like more non-Muslims. They also live in these areas, okay? You can see they live more towards the outside of these areas, but again, on the right, we've got the map of the deprivation. And you have areas where you've got high Muslim populations and high white populations and high deprivation. So it's a joint problem. It's not just a Muslim problem. Okay. So we need to make sure that when we do things to lift people, that the interventions are going to help the people who are most deprived, not just the people who are on the right boat. Yes?
Is the data for the breakdown of the parameters that contribute to the ELM publicly available so we can understand the profile of each contributing factor towards the IMD? So we can also see which of the factors are more related to human activity and which are more government policy.
Yeah, so it's all on the ONS website, if you look up Index of Multiple Deprivation. And with the Muslim population in these areas, it's mainly deprivation in the housing dimension. That's the biggest one that's affecting all of them.
When you categorize white,
Yes.
that's not just white British, is it?
This is, in this case, it's white British, it's white English, Welsh, Scottish, and Northern Irish, but not other whites or mixtures. It's very small, sorry.
So it's Welsh, Scottish, okay, but not white other. Okay.
Not white. So anyone who calls themselves white, but not a mix or white something else. Yeah.
Fine, thanks. Thank you. So you just pick up the comment about government policy or other factors. In the last of these topics, we'll be comparing and asking the question, why is it in some local authorities there are this, for example, there's high level of poor health, but not in another? Or why is there in some authorities a high level of overcrowding and not another? Why is there in some local authorities a high level of no qualification, people emerging without any academic qualifications? So these are issues where we want to get back to this and say, look, you are our elected representatives. Why is this not the same as somewhere else? Has there been a failure in policy? Okay, so I'm going to be dealing with something else now. The show carries on. So what I'm going to do is look at what are called age pyramids. So what is an age pyramid? This is it's on the left-hand side. You have the different age bands, okay, starting from the younger age bands, moving in 5-year steps to the older age bands on the left. That's the profile for the whole of the UK, men and women. And on the right, you have it for the Muslims. Okay, so there's an obvious difference, right? We are very much skewed towards the younger population, right? And this is what we mean, what when I was referring to the why Muslims are a strategic asset to the nation, because it is this young population which is working, which is paying the NI contributions for the retired people, for the pensioners. Right? So it's something really, really quite important for us to bear in mind. It's also called the demographic dividend. Right? And it's not just Muslims, it's the immigrant population generally have a very different age profile. So for example, amongst Muslims, our median age is 29 years, right, on the right-hand side, but for the overall population is 44 years. Right? In the Muslim population at the moment, only 5% are over 65 years old. In the overall population is 19%. Okay, but again, please let's not be complacent, because these young people in 20, 30 years' time will be in the old age category. And the question is, what are we doing now to prepare for that scenario? Okay, and this is what, again, I think Fatema is going to pick that up. Are we saving enough at the moment for old age? Because we all have this expectation that our children look after us, but inshallah that will be for a lot of the cases, but not everybody.
Is it giving longer facilities as well? The Indian population lives longer than the Muslim population. This is why we have fewer elderly compared to.
No, I think it's a profile because of immigration patterns. Yeah, immigrants, first generation, then second generation, first generation having children, second generation, younger profile.
If the Muslim population is putting it into 5 days, obviously the health outcomes are not the same as patients. So minor
Yeah. So this is something which my colleague Mahbub Asaria there, he's an actuarist, is looking at in more detail because he's fascinated by what you call these life tables. So you can have a conversation with him, but there's an area we need to do more work on, because certainly during COVID, there was marked differences in mortality amongst the BME population compared with others. Yeah. But this really is because more to do with the immigration and settlement nature. Yes.
Do birth rate science?
Of course, so younger, exactly. So, I mean, again, I think Fatema will pick this up, size of families, but I think at the moment it's what, 1.9, in the general population? 1.8, so it's not, overall it's not sustainable, because you need 2.1 for a sustainable population. And in the Muslim community, because we are younger, we have the children, we don't have the same, again, most importantly, we value families, right? So as family life is a inherent part of the way we live. We raise children in families.
I think there are some figures available in terms of localities, like life expectancy in the West London and East London. And in terms of ethnicity and religion, probably no study took place so far, as well as I'm aware of. That'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, certainly deprivation, I think my colleague Professor Iqbal knows, if you compare North and South, or even within the borough, there can be a 10-year difference.
Yeah, exactly.
Like in the Royal Borough of Kensington, you have the very posh areas and the very poor areas, and there's 10-year difference in life expectancy.
I mean, from Westminster to Leytonstone tube station,
Right.
each stops you see 1 year reduction
Really?
of the life expectancy. So you get the area, but not the ethnicity or religion.
Yes. Look,
Yeah, thank you.
the Marmot report. Yes. Yeah.
They've done something similar in Birmingham, where they've
Okay.
done the transport network and they've looked at life expectancy. I'll be interested to see how this compares, as in the pyramid compares to Bangladesh's demographic pyramid and also Pakistan.
Yeah.
To see whether or not there is an anomaly here, or whether this is consistent with
Right.
the Muslim heritage centers that our populations are diasporas of.
No, I think this is consistent because, after all, the Pakistani Bangladeshi form maybe 65% of the Muslim population.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd be useful to see whether that assumption is
Okay.
correct.
We may have done that, and we can share that with you, because we've done it for all the ethnic groups as well.
In terms of deprivation, when the sister was representing, this KP11, is the deprivation because of location? So, when the invasion happens, it comes to these locations, and these locations are already being deprived locations. And therefore, when Muslims come to these areas, they are worse off.
Yeah.
Could that be
Well, I think
location related, or is that?
no, you have a point there, because see, the first generation came for labor, to provide labor after the Second World War. These were in the legacy industries. The legacy industries have closed down, right? They probably stayed there because the network was there, the mosques were there, right? The schools were there, No, I mean, I would disagree with you. I think, for example, the Bangladeshi community has come with greater social capital, all right? And the reason I'm saying that is this, that if you look at overcrowding, right, it is greater in the East End among the Bangladeshi population, right? But there's a correlation between overcrowding, and people say overcrowding leads to poor educational results in children because they don't have space for homework, etc. But the educational performance of Bangladeshi children is above average, right? So that must be because of the value parents are putting on education. So that, which I would relate to social capital.
Yeah, but if we look at in terms of graduate caliber, of graduate incoming immigration, Bangladesh is much less graduates incoming compared to, say, Indian and other communities.
Okay.
I am mindful of how long this presentation is, so and we don't have a lot of time. We could pull
But-
down some of the details. But we wanted to-
Let us carry on, and but I mean, sure, but we are looking forward to interaction, and because it's a live project. So though we have published a report, there are still new questions coming up, right? Which we would like to. Are you from the NHS?
I am.
Okay, good. So we keep in touch.
Excuse me, sir. I have questions.
Please.
I'm a student, so I'm not coming as a British, I'm coming as a Muslim. So my question is that, though we are living here, so in the circumstances, we are focusing our Muslim populations, how actually growing and decreasing. So in this ways, how actually, what is the work we are doing to improve our quality? And even though those who are actually mentioning, those who are coming as immigrations in different countries around the world. So in this aspect, actually, if they come in here as a Muslim, so how we are actually welcoming, and how actually we are trying to be them being all are together, united. So in that way, if we discriminate with of us, so how it would be actually to do good work. So in that way, please, I need to know the work.
Okay, so maybe I think the best thing would be for Junaid to comment later, because what is happening at ELM is an example of what is being done to bring communities together and to provide education. In fact, there used to be a job training center here before. So maybe you can have that conversation with Junaid later. Not at all. Okay, good. So yeah.
At the end, we can have a conversation about some of the challenges that's presented here and what we can do to meet those challenges. So we can have a conversation right at the end about that.
Okay, so should I carry on? So okay, so I mean, in fact, this is also very relevant. So there are positive signs going on in the community. So there is deprivation, there is overcrowding, but there are signals where we are doing, in spite of all this, Muslims are doing we are pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps, as the saying goes. So our level of degree level education has gone up, right, over the last 20 years, from 21% to 32%, right? But again, as someone was saying, we have to look at the quality of the degree. You know, are the young Muslims going to the Russell Group universities or not? Are they doing the degrees which are in demand in the marketplace, right? So,
How is compared to other religions?
so Muslim generally, we are much lower if you compare with the Hindu faith community in many of these measures. But the point we wanted to make here is that not all is doom and gloom. There are areas where we can see improvement, okay? And one of the areas we're seeing improvement is the proportion of Muslims reaching level 4, i.e. degree level qualifications, right?
You can disaggregate that into like Bangladesh, Pakistani.
Yeah, we can, because as I said, you know, so there's religion as a sense variable, and there's ethnicity. And in some of our presentations, specific to Bangladesh community organizations, we've just looked at Bangladeshi data. So education is improving, but there are some caveats. Are we studying the right things? What is happening if with AI and taking over certain types of jobs, right? All those are big issues for us. So Muslims in the labor market, again, we are more employed to a greater extent. You know, level of unemployment has gone down. It's gone up from, not great, but from 37.8% to 40.2%. So that is growing in the Muslim community. Also, the caveat here is that it may be growing in the gig economy, right, which is precarious employment, where there are fewer protection rights for the gig workers. You know, but generally, the level of employment, economic activity is increasing. Then, so this is coming back to this issue of Muslims in higher-level jobs. Again, there's an increase from 6.6% in 2001 to 8.2%. Overall, it's gone from 10.3 to 13.1. So we are improving. So this is really where there is a glass ceiling for Muslims. You know, up to a certain point, if you don't belong to the right clubs or wear the right tie, you may not go beyond a certain level. Okay, so but this is much more anecdotal information rather than census-based information. When in reality, there are glass ceilings, which are boundaries to how high Muslims can rise up, and that's why it's important for Muslims who are already well established in their professions to mentor the younger entrants. And I'd just like to mention a book by Hashi Muhammad, which I would recommend, How to Break These Barriers. So he's got some very smart advice, you know, how you need to go up the career ladder. You know, when is it necessary to speak posh? When is it necessary to wear a suit? You know, how to play the game, basically. We have to learn how to play the game and break into the higher levels. Okay, so how much time before Asr now? Because there's another...
It's going to be it's like 2 minutes and then...
2 minutes, okay. So here, you know,
We'll stay behind after about another 10 minutes.
Right, okay. So we may not finish this, but what is the evidence to challenge the right-wing tropes, all right? And the right-wing typical tropes are Muslims are a burden on the NHS, we are not British-born, foreign, don't speak English, we have no sense of identity, and we like to live in ghettos. Okay, so in each of these, there's some data to challenge it. Okay, so I just have 2 more items in this. How do we confront the right-wing tropes? One of these is that the famous Farage and Elon Musk statement that Muslims don't identify themselves with the nation they belong to. Again, the data point to something else. So 89% of British-born Muslims are clear that their national identity is British, right? Quite unequivocal. So just like there's a measure of deprivation, there's also a measure developed at the University of Manchester which measures the level of dispersal of a community. How concentrated you are not dispersed. How spread out you are more dispersed, okay? And you know, whatever Farage went to Oldham and said, Muslims are not, we don't like live in ghettos, okay? There are other communities who are much more ghettoized than we are. And we have done data for several boroughs, and generally Muslims are not the least dispersed, okay, community. If you look at Hackney, all right, the lower the level of this measure, of this index, the most dispersed. Okay, Christians are at 20 because they're the majority, okay. Muslims are 28. But if you look at another faith community, it is 74, okay. So again, you know, there's data there to tackle these tropes. So organizations like MCB, you know, we can provide you the bullets, but someone has to use the ammunition. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm a little bit relieved by that because it's a bit heavy, this section. So we're going to talk about the types of, initially we're going to start talking about the types of Muslim household that we have. And across this section, red shows the Muslim population and blue is everyone, okay? So this is the types of household we have as Muslims. And we can see that the most common type of household is 36%, where we've got a married couple with dependent children. And the Muslim households are 2.5 times more likely than the average household to have a household where you have a married couple with dependent children. We also have 10% of households where you have a lone parent with children. compared to 6.9% in the overall population. So it's quite a high population of single-parent Muslim households, and often this ends up being a woman. Okay? And then we've also got 5% of households are single-person households, which is less than the overall population, but actually equates to 180,000 Muslims who are living in single-person households. And so then there's the question of isolation and what our communities can do for these people. Okay. Then we're looking at the school-age population. If we look at Tower Hamlets, 70% of school-age children in Tower Hamlets are Muslim. Okay, when we're talking about school age, we're talking about 5 to 16-year-olds. Okay, 51% of school-age children in Newham are Muslim, 44% in Redbridge, and 31% in Barking and Dagenham. Okay, so across the UK, 1 in 10 school-age children is Muslim, but in these boroughs, it's 56%, 57% are Muslim. Okay, so these boroughs have very, very high Muslim school-age population. So we need to think about what are we doing for the school-age children? Do they have their places to pray? Do they get their halal food? And then are we building them up? Because actually these children who are school age today in 40 years will be the people working in this area. And we need to make sure we're doing enough to build them up now so that our future Muslim population is where we want it to be. In terms of housing, we have more private rented housing. We have more social rented housing. So our social rented housing is 27% compared to 17% in the overall population. Whereas if we look at Tower Hamlets, the social housing is 67% compared to the overall population, 67% in social housing. And then we have a lower proportion of people who own their own houses. It's 42% for the Muslim population compared to 63% for the overall population. But in Tower Hamlets, that goes down to 12% for the Muslim population. And the issue with house ownership is that you're more exposed to housing costs and insecurity if you don't own the house. If you're relying on renting, there's just issues that somebody might throw you out because they need to do something with the house, the rent prices change, just things like that you have to bear in mind more. And then there's the issue of overcrowding. Uncle Jamil said that we have families that are living more on overcrowding, and so it does make it harder for us to study. Things like that could be part of the issue. 25% of Muslims live in overcrowded housing. Okay, that means there's less rooms than are needed for the people to live comfortably. So maybe more than two. I think it's more than two of a single sex living in one room. Okay. So despite this, when we look at degree level of attainment among the young Muslims, we started behind everyone in 2001, and by 2021, we've overtaken the general population. Okay. Young Muslims are more likely than their peers to hold a degree. Half of Muslim full-time, and then we've got women actually who are leading some of that way. So half of Muslim full-time students are now women. Okay. Young Muslim women outqualify young Muslim men. And 24% of young Muslim women in Tower Hamlets hold degrees, which is the highest of England's major Muslim districts. An interesting point about where things are going, we've got 59.5% of Muslim women who are 65 plus today hold no qualifications. But if we look at their granddaughters, those women who are 16 to 24 today, only 10% hold no qualifications. So if we look at those granddaughters when they're grown up, I think the outlook is looking better, but it takes time. Okay? But despite all of this, as Jamil Uncle was saying, that it's not necessarily reflected in those workplace outcomes. Everyone's got the degree, but is it the right one? Are there other barriers to their work? We need to look more into those things. if we look at Muslim women in the labor market, this is like over time. The economic active Muslim woman, the percentage of economic active Muslim women has gone up by 11.4% since 2001. Okay, but it's still much lower than the national average, which is 56%. So the Muslim women are at 42%. And 27.3% of Muslim women are caring for home and family, compared to only 7.8% of the overall population. And then there's health. So young Muslims report a similar health to everybody else. But we can see this gap opening up with age. Okay. 30% of Muslim women who are 65 plus report themselves to be in bad or very bad health, compared with only 13% of the overall population. This number reaches 40.5% in Tower Hamlets for Muslim women who are over 65, okay, compared to 26.8% of Muslim women, 26.8% of women in Tower Hamlets in general who are over 65. So there's a big disparity between the Muslim woman in Tower Hamlets and the other women in Tower Hamlets. 23% of Muslim in Tower Hamlets of Muslim women over 65 in Tower Hamlets don't speak English. So some of it could be a language barrier. Some of it could be that the older generation they lack qualifications. So accessing healthcare is harder for them. Maybe accessing now, I don't know, when I book with my GP, I have to go through an app. It's harder for them. So just lots of access barriers. They're born abroad, they've had harder migration journeys, so their overall health is different. There's also perhaps an issue with menopause care. There are language barriers. If someone comes to their GP and says, I get fevers often, they're going to be treated to someone differently to someone who comes to their GP and say, I get hot flushes. And actually this feeds in to uptake of HRT, and it said that 1 in 2 women over 50 who don't take HRT will develop osteoporosis. So how you're treated and how your access to healthcare makes a very big difference to your outcomes later on in life as well. Also looking to our future, the current population of Muslims over 65 is only 5% of the Muslim population, is just under 200,000, okay? If the youth today keep growing, we're going to reach close to 1 million in 20 years, okay? So we need to look at how we look after this population, this growing elderly population, in terms of their retirement, in terms of their health, in terms of setting up things like lasting power of attorneys. If somebody falls sick and they can't make decisions for themselves, just having things in place so that somebody else legally can make decisions for them. And the UK population in general has limited pension knowledge, okay? The Muslim population is no different. So here on the left, I've got the amount that a typical person needs to spend each year during their retirement, okay? This is to cover things like their bills, their food costs, day-to-day travel, okay? It excludes housing cost. It excludes anything that they need for social care. It excludes anything that they might need for their dependents and other personal expenses, okay? And then on the right, I've got how much you need in savings on top of a full state pension to start your retirement at age 67 at the moment, okay? The full state pension is £12,500 a year. And you only get this if you have 35 years of qualifying national insurance credits. A lot of Muslims are self-employed. They might not get national insurance credits. There's the 27% of Muslim women who are looking after house and home. They may not be getting their national insurance credits. These things affect how much people will have when it comes to retirement, okay? We said that housing isn't included in this. So if you don't own your house, then you're going to have to save up enough to pay for your housing costs on top of this. And then even when it comes to workplace pensions, often Muslims might opt out of a workplace pension just because the funds that the default funds are not always Sharia compliant. And just for an example, so yeah, you can see how much you need to save, basically. There's a lot of numbers there. Okay, there's two small things that you can do just to get people started and make sure that your communities are beginning to be protected. So you can claim what's already yours. So a full state pension needs 35 years of national insurance contributions. Some of them you can earn without actually being in paid work, okay? So if you are looking after a child and you're claiming child benefit, you can be claiming that child benefit and that will add to your state pension years until your child is 12. Or if you are a carer, there are things that you can do so that that qualifies for you to get that national insurance contribution years. So those 27% of Muslim women who are looking after house and home, some of them could be earning state pension credit so that when it comes to their retirement, they're in a better position. And for today's pensioners, they need to look into boosting their income through pension credit take-up, okay? And it was stated recently in The Guardian that actually ethnic minority pension pots are less than half of that of the average white British saver. So it's gonna backfire at some point. It's gonna come out, and there's a lot of us that are gonna be around.
Thank you, Fatema. It was quite a lot of data there, but it's very, very urgent that we don't forget saving for the future from a pension point of view. Okay, this is the last section on political engagement. At the outset, I just want to make clear that the Muslim Council of Britain is a non-partisan organization as far as the political parties are concerned. Though we promote engagement through voter registration, producing manifestos, producing checklists of what to ask parliamentary candidates. So in that sense, there's no political bias in the work of the MCB. And in this report, there's a whole chapter on voting with detailed analysis of constituencies where there are large Muslim populations, comparisons with constituencies which are marginal, which only have, the victor has only won by a few hundred seats. Compare that with the Muslim population. So now what I want to do is come back to how do we put our councillors on the line, okay? So they only come to us at time of council elections, and then we don't hear from them again. But there are a number of issues where we can press them now. And we have, so the important thing is to have the data to press the councillors. So for example, and I referred to this earlier, and Fatema also touched on this, overcrowding. In Tower Hamlets, the occupancy rating, i.e. overcrowding of less than one room or more, is 46%. But we don't have this case elsewhere. So what has Newcastle upon Tyne done, which Tower Hamlets is not doing in terms of reducing overcrowding? Okay. So those are the sorts of, that's the evidence base to challenge councillors. And if you look at women in poor health, and Fatima touched on this, that there's a serious problem after a certain age in our community amongst elderly women, declaring very bad health. So again, sorry to pick Tower Hamlets, and there's going to be a good news story for Tower Hamlets later, so don't worry. In Tower Hamlets, 40.5% of Muslim women aged 65 or over claim bad or very bad health. But in a place like Slough, which also has a Muslim population, right, but not a Bangladeshi Muslim population, it is much lower, 24.2. So this brings us back to the debate. Is it lifestyle versus structural discrimination? Okay, what is contributing to the poor health? It's something we should all, which is an active research question. Okay, why, and then again, why are the Muslims with no qualifications? Why are they leaving the system? So for example, in Newcastle upon Tyne, 13.6% leave with no qualification, but Tower Hamlets in the 16-24 age group is 8.6%. Okay, so going back, Tower Hamlets has this amazing aspects where there's overcrowding, there's deprivation, but yet educationally there's a good news story. So this was just some examples, and in the report there's an appendix for 9 census variables where we look at where there is positive signs in local government and where there's negative signs.